Sherry, take it away.
Warm greetings from rainy Southern California. My name is Sherry Mueller, and it's my privilege to serve on the board of the Public Diplomacy Council of America. It's also my privilege to welcome each and every one of you to this webinar, this first Monday forum, featuring the best of cultural diplomacy today, the winners of the Lois Roth Foundation Awards for Excellence in Cultural Diplomacy. It's a personal pleasure to welcome you today because I was fortunate enough to know Lois Roth. When I was a grad student, I remember having some wonderful, instructive luncheons with her and Dick Arndt. I cited her in my dissertation, and she was a role model for me, as she was for so many others. I want to take a moment to thank our co-sponsors, the University of Southern California Annenberg Center for Communication, Leadership, and Policy, as well as the George Washington University Institute for Public Diplomacy and Global Communication. And of course, the Lois Roth Foundation is a partner of PDCA and a partner in presenting today's program. I want to say thank you to our tech hosts. Owen Foster is a junior fellow at the Annenberg Center at USC, and our very own Gabby Stahl, who is the PDCA Hans Tom Tuck Graduate Fellow. They remind me to ask each of you to put any technical questions in the chat box and your questions for our speakers in the Q&A box. Now it's a special delight to introduce Anne Barbaro, who's done a superb job of pulling this program together. She will serve as our moderator, And I was lucky enough to work with Anne when she was treasurer of the Public Diplomacy Council. She's had an impressive career in the U.S. Foreign Service and has, as a public diplomacy officer, she's a current member of the Public Diplomacy Council of America board, and she's served on the board of the Lois Roth Foundation since 2013, where she is in charge of managing the Awards for Excellence in Cultural Diplomacy program. Anne, over to you. Please tell us more about the foundation and today's speakers that you have recruited for us. Anne.
Thank you, Sherry. The mission of the Lois Roth Foundation is to foster dialogue across national, linguistic, and cultural boundaries. One of the ways we do this is through our Awards for Excellence in Cultural Diplomacy, which we give every year in partnership with the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs to Department of State employees. Cultural diplomacy is a subset of public diplomacy, which many of you are familiar with through things like press conferences and ambassador speeches. But cultural diplomacy focuses on building long-term relationships, which is done through international and academic exchanges, English language teaching programs, arts programs, and many more. The success of cultural diplomacy programs is measured in months or years rather than in the 24-hour news cycle. In the fall of 2023, the Lois Roth Foundation and ECA awarded 9 outstanding cultural diplomats, and I urge you to navigate to our website, loisrothfoundation.org, to learn about these amazing individuals and the work they've done. Cultural diplomacy programs are delivered at U.S. embassies by a team of Foreign Service officers and locally engaged staff who are supported by Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs staff based in Washington, D.C. Today, we have 3 award-winning members of each of those groups who will tell us about the best of cultural diplomacy today. I'd like to start with our Foreign Service officer, Larry Socha, who will tell us about his experience in Mogadishu, Somalia. Over to you, Larry.
Thank you so much, Anne. Thank you for that kind introduction. It's an honor to be with all of you, and I'm grateful to the State Department, the Public Diplomacy Council of America, the Lois Roth Foundation, and my fellow award winners for this opportunity. I also can't begin without thanking the incredible embassy team in Mogadishu, including those who continue our work today, for giving me something to talk about. I served as public affairs officer in Mogadishu, Somalia, from August 2022 to August 2023. And one of the first journalists I encountered in Somalia was Matt Gutman of ABC News. He had got in touch with the embassy by emailing the Embassy Nairobi Consular American Citizen Services email address, which is a good place to start if you don't have any contacts of your own. The close working relationship between Embassy Nairobi and Embassy Mogadishu ensured that the message was quickly passed my way. Matt was interested in covering the threat of famine in Somalia, a dire humanitarian situation that had killed already 1/3 of the national herd and had forced nearly 7 million people into situations of grave hunger. When Matt made it out to Mogadishu finally, one of the first things he said to me was, "I didn't even know you guys were here. I thought everything was run out of Nairobi." And I informed him that the U.S. Embassy had opened its permanent presence in Mogadishu just under 3 years ago. And while we were still a very young embassy, our diplomatic and development presence, and that of our military colleagues, of course, gave the Somali government and many people in Somalia, among other things, confidence in the partnership between our two countries. Somalia has 2 official languages, Somali and Arabic. And the vehicle that I got into when I got off the plane in Mogadishu on my first day, I shared with a U.S. aid officer who said that I should Google Mogadishu, but I should spell one in the standard English script, which I've done at the top of the screen here. And then I should spell the other using Somali, the screenshot at the bottom of the screen. And she told me to take a look at the pictures that come up in the image search. And I got her point immediately. Half the photos on the top have ruined buildings or descriptions of Mogadishu's danger, the stuff out of the National Geographics when I was a kid. And the Somali spelling at the bottom reveals high rises and glass and even a large sports stadium in town. And while I knew it, though I was likely really nervous and maybe a little scared of the challenges of starting a new post, from that very first night I Googled this, it drove home the importance of the understanding of perspective and the narrative that accompanies it and the people who tell it. Next slide, please. Foreign Service Officer Lois Roth knew this as well as anyone. Her citation here of President Carter speaks to the role of public diplomacy in the exchange of perspectives and how it benefits U.S. foreign policy. She practiced it in Tehran, Rome, Paris, and Washington, D.C., and it was my honor to receive an award in her name last year. And it's now my job, a couple miles down the beach from this photo here of Lido Beach, a popular recreational site in Mogadishu, to continue to facilitate that exchange as Lois Roth did. Next slide, please. I had a lot of jobs at Embassy Mogadishu. As a 3-year-old embassy with a very small footprint and our locally employed staff members based in Nairobi, I was everything from the ambassador's public diplomacy advisor to his photographer. This image here, Ambassador Andre is introducing, of course, our U.S. representative to the United Nations, Linda Thomas Greenfield, to members of our mission team. I like this photo because the 3 officers that she's greeting here are the acting senior defense official, our political military chief diplomat, and the head of USAID. It's defense, diplomacy, and development, 3 pillars of our foreign policy, and partners who would help me tell the American story in Mogadishu after nearly a 30-year absence. Next slide, please. I mentioned Embassy Nairobi, and I want to use this image to illustrate the fantastic support that we receive from our colleagues there. Here, I'm visiting the Young African Leaders Initiative Regional Leadership Center. With support from our USAID colleagues, these centers in Nairobi, Accra, Dakar, and Pretoria offer leadership training and education to thousands of young Africans, including the Somalis here. And between the 2 SEALs, is my local teammate, Fozia Mohammed, who's a consummate professional and incredibly supportive. I leaned on her cultural knowledge, her language skills, and quite honestly, her positive energy throughout my tour. Next slide, please. And in these next slides, I just want to talk a little bit about who we reached, why, and how we did so in a challenging security environment. This shot is from my first month in Mogadishu. I worked with that USAID officer I met in my first hour on the ground to support our ambassador's participation in International Literacy Day and the more than 100,000 students who receive an education because of support from the United States. It was also a time for the ambassador to engage one of the highest ranking and closest advisors to President Hassan Sheikh Mohammed, Minister of Education Farah Sheikh Abdul Qadir. One aspect of the strength of the United States, I strongly believe in, whether in Mogadishu or here in Zimbabwe or where I am currently or around the world, is our convening power. We bring people together. And that could be the political elites at the center of this photograph or the students, many on the margins of Somali society. Next slide, please. And we also reach the Somalis somewhere between the political elites and the margins. Here, the Vice Chancellor of CMOD University, a leading university in Mogadishu, opens the American Corner. I'm indebted to my predecessor, Kahina Robinson, for her work in starting this project and my team for helping me get it over the finish line. But for our embassy, for the most part, limited to the airport compound, this cultural and educational center in the center of Mogadishu itself was invaluable. The flyer on the right gives an example of some of our programming that we did with students. These were real conversations about their future and their agency within it. It's also a testament, as our ambassador said over and over again, of this idea of one team, one mission approach to our diplomacy in Mogadishu. It's the smallest embassy I've ever worked in. I miss it now that I'm back in this world of decision memos and clearances that I briefly left behind in the short time I was in Mogadishu. If I ever needed something, I would shout across the room to a member of country team. And in this program in particular, we had the involvement of Colonel John Bishop, who was the Joint Special Operations Task Force Somalia commander. And here we have a senior military official who talked in plain language without acronyms to Somali young people about the fight against al-Shabaab and working toward a more safe and peaceful Somalia. It's that connection, that conversation, and our American corner that are at the heart of public diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, helping to tell the American story and counter myths and disinformation. Next slide, please. We use several cultural tools to reach Somali audiences. American Film Showcase, which is a wonderful partnership between the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs and the University of Southern California, enabled us to screen films and engage professional film networks. Here I'm hosting Barkhad Abdi, a recognizable face from Captain Phillips, not to talk about pirates from decades ago, but to talk about making movies with young people. A group of filmmakers we gathered for this event in particular called the Somali Storytellers. We told the American story through music, photography, and food, including in the bottom right corner there, the iftar that the ambassador had hosted for the Minister of Religious Affairs and political and business leaders. At dinner, we had pre-recorded messages of goodwill from imams in Minneapolis and St. Paul and diaspora communities across the United States. Next slide, please. So I'm running short on time, and so that can sound like a laundry list of activities of things we did. But what we did overall was to draw individuals into the orbit of the U.S. Embassy. And that's what our Deputy Chief of Mission, Tim Trenkel, is doing here, encouraging these young people influenced by their U.S. experience, whether through a program or exchange, to be change makers in their communities, to serve as credible third-party voices on our foreign policy priorities, including security, economic development, and democratic inclusion. And especially in a place like Hargeisa, whose political leaders would object to even how I've labeled this slide, given their self-declared separatist state of Somaliland. What we've done with these young people is form positive, lifelong connections with the United States. The last slide, please. And that's why the connection's so strong, especially with Somalia. It's in part because of the diaspora connections with Minneapolis or Columbus, Ohio, or Fargo, North Dakota. This administration alone has given us new tools to engage with those diaspora communities, whether through Secretary Blinken's subnational diplomacy unit, President Biden's establishment of an advisory council on African diaspora engagement. That will benefit me and my successors who will work in Somalia to continue to engage the important bridge that diaspora communities are. But just one thing I want to go back to real quickly, and that's what Barkhad Abdi said, that actor from Captain Phillips, that we hosted. You know, we were asking questions, and it's a motley group of people. It's soldiers and young filmmakers and diplomats. And he said to this group, he said, for the narrative to change, the reality has to change. And I found that an incredibly unifying moment for our team, Somali and American alike, whether in Mogadishu or Minneapolis, in uniform or not. We were all pulling together to change the reality. And in Somalia, that's going to take time. But I can guarantee you that the mission team in Somalia is working smart and hard to make that happen. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you very much, Larry. That's an amazing range of programs, and it really shows how we can go from many different angles to look at different U.S. policy priorities that also affect priorities of the host country and address those. So thank you very much for that. I just want to remind the audience that if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. And now we'll turn to Sami Saeed, who's our award-winning locally employed staff member from Tunis, Tunisia. Over to you.
Thank you, Anne. Today, I chose to speak to our esteemed audience about the U.S. Embassy Tunis success story, that of funding the creation of a cybersecurity center of excellence at one of the leading technological institutes in Tunisia, and which stands out as a unique example in North Africa. Allow me to use the next 2 slides to share with you some interesting facts about Tunisia and about Tunisian-American relations. So next slide, please. So as illustrated by this map, Tunisia is a country in Northern Africa, bordering the Mediterranean Sea, having a western border with Algeria and southeastern border with Libya. Tunisia has always been at the crossroads of civilizations Many civilizations went through Tunisia, like the Romans, the Carthaginians, the Byzantine, the Ottomans, and many more. About 12 million Tunisians live and breathe on this land. Its official language is Arabic, but the Tunsi, which is the Tunisian dialect, is a rich mixture of Arabic, French, Italian, and even Franglish words. Education is free and mandatory until the age of 16, which accounts for the high rate of literacy. 96% is the literacy rate. And the information and communication technology sector accounts for 11% of the country's GDP, which is a significant percentage. Next slide, please. Now, a word about the Tunisian-American relations. The US has maintained its relations with Tunisia since 1795. The Treaty of Peace and Friendship between the US and Tunisia was signed in 1797, and the consulate was established in 1800. And with the independence of Tunisia in 1956, we had the US embassy established in Tunisia. Next slide, please. So what is the rationale for creating a cybersecurity center in Tunisia? Our mission in Tunisia, our US mission to Tunisia has three main priorities, which is securing the economic development of the country, the democratic transition, and of course, focusing a lot on security. So the rationale for creating this center of excellence is basically two main ones, which is economic empowerment and security. Next slide, please. So what will this project allow us to achieve, basically, is to train tomorrow's leading experts who will accompany Tunisia through its digitization transition to embrace the digital economy, and that checks the economic box. Raising students' awareness on using a technology that protects their personal data, and most importantly, countering PRC influence as they continue to plant Huawei ICT academies throughout the country. Next slide, please. So this center was created in October 2022 at the Higher Institute of Technological Studies. It's part of a national network of institutes which exist in 24 governorates. They're all under the Information and Communication Technology Ministry. Why did we choose this location? Because it's strategically located within a technological park where we have startups, we have businesses, we have technological institutes as well. And the question was, did we face any challenges? And the question definitely, yes, because of the heavy bureaucracy here. However, if you know the Minister of Information and Communication Technology, because he was a Fulbright visiting scholar, and he went on this program on your watch, then it makes definitely things much easier. If you know also the director of the institute, and she went on a cybersecurity program and experienced the US technology, that makes things much, much easier, of course. Next slide, please. So the minister enjoyed the project so much that he decided to integrate it as part of the ICT Ministry's National Strategic Plan, which is a very, very important step for us. And the director offered 3 spacious classrooms to host the cybersecurity center, which is actually a very big deal in a state-owned university. The space is very, hard to get. And what did we do? We funded, we did, first of all, go through a call for tender to select the right company to do this. We selected Fortinet, which is a leading company in network security, which will create the space, provide the equipment, and do the certifications and provide the licenses for all the faculty members and the students. Next slide, please. So what have we accomplished? We can go on to the next slide. So the Higher Institute of Technological Studies Tunis director organized summer institutes for one representative from each of the 24 institutes around the country to benefit from Fortinet certified trainings. So we had one faculty member receiving certification from Fortinet, and he will be going back to his university and training the other faculty members. And of course, this will have a nationwide impact. Fortinet also provided certified trainings to 25 faculty members from the Higher Institute of Technological Studies in Tunis. And of course, all students from this institute benefited from practical training. That means we had the web developers working side by side with the students working on simulations of hacking operations, and that contributed to improving the capacities and skills of the students working on web development, and the capacities and skills of the students working, of course, on their hacking capacities. Next slide, please. Since this institute is a public institute and the director has been very generous, allowing students even from high schools to attend certain awareness campaigns about cybersecurity, we invited several high school students from the neighborhood public schools to attend awareness campaigns on how they can protect their identity online. And they received certificates, as you can see from this picture, at the end of the training. And that was really the highlight for all of them. Next slide, please. What has been also accomplished with the academy itself, with Fortinet. So Fortinet became the academic partner of the Higher Institute of Technological Studies. They signed with Fortinet an agreement to provide trainings and deliver free vouchers to students and teachers to become certified in network security engineering. Next slide, please. What did we achieve in terms of public-private partnerships? We did achieve a lot. We approached Cisco, which is a worldwide leader in IT, to waive the cost of exams for students interested in cybersecurity and cloud computing. We also had InstaDeep, which is a very well-reputed Tunisian-based artificial intelligence startup, which was recently purchased by BioNTech. And they donated Smartboard to this cybersecurity center of excellence. And of course, Fortinet, as I mentioned earlier, became an academic partner of HITS. Next slide, please. What are the gains on the strategic policy front? Well, the Cybersecurity Decree Law of March 11, 2023 came into effect on September 11, 2023, broadening the authority of the National Computer Security Agency. So to underline this transformation, the institution's name changed to the National Agency for Cybersecurity. And many Tunisian financial institutions are now more than ever aware that they need to have a high level of protection from trusted and trustworthy network solutions providers to protect their PII, personally identified information. Next. The media coverage, we had a very good coverage, and I can probably mention that the first one, L'Économiste Maghrébin, was picked this news, and it was shared by so many other outlets, media outlets in the region, in the Maghreb region. That means Tunisia, Algeria, Libya, Mauritania. The next one shows also We Are Tech Africa. It shows how specialized online magazines and online newspapers picked up this news about this excellent project. And we had seen ones in French and ones in English, and that's basically because French Africa and Francophone Africa and Anglophone Africa showed interest in this important project. Next, I think that's it for now until we get to the questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sammy. And I think that's a really great example of building long-term relationships, because because you sent the one person on the Fulbright and you sent the other person exchange program, that facilitated your building this program that covers very young people from grammar school up through university that are going to build relationships for generations to come. So congratulations on that. And again, I remind the audience, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A and we're going to address them all after our next speaker. Dr. Jenny Verdaguer, the branch chief for Western Hemisphere Fulbright programs in the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, who's going to be telling us about a program she developed in Washington to support academic exchange programs in the field. Jenny.
Yes, thank you, Anne. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to join you, and thank you to the Lois Roth Foundation and the Public Diplomacy Council for this opportunity. Next slide, please. So, it's been a real pleasure for me to have been able to work all these years for America's flagship exchange program in a world region that is very close to me personally, and I have strong ties because of birth and because of training. Overseeing such a vast and heterogeneous region such as the Western Hemisphere, with as many as 27 active Fulbright programs, is only possible with the support of a high-performing team. So in that slide, you can see the smiley faces of my wonderful WHA branch colleagues in a happy moment last year. Together, we oversee 9 Fulbright binational commissions and 18 post-administered countries in the annual oversight of approximately 1,600 participants, which includes both scholars and students on both sides of the exchange. We are supported in this effort by Fulbright cooperating agencies, and of course by our binational commissions and public affairs colleagues at U.S. embassies across the hemisphere. So the focus of my presentation this afternoon will be Fulbright Amazonia, which is a new scholar initiative that we just launched to support cutting-edge research and cross-sector collaboration across the Amazon basin. Next slide, please. So unlike traditional Fulbright scholars, Amazonia participants are selected as part of a cohort to conduct applied research that results in actionable policies that directly improve the quality of life of local communities. So the program has a real applied bent to it. Participants are organized in multidisciplinary and multinational teams and focus on thematic research areas guided by distinguished lead scholars who provide the intellectual leadership to the group. You can see in this picture our 16 Amazonian scholars joined by our 2 co-lead scholars. One is from Brazil and one from the United States, both Fulbright alumni. I invite you to read about their impressive backgrounds in our website at fulbrightscholar.gov/Amazonia. This is an eclectic group of scholars. We have anthropologists, sociologists, geographers, chemical engineers, public health professionals, forest engineers, and even filmmakers. How does the program advance American foreign policy? Very clearly, because it directly responds to President Biden's plan to promote global climate security and to conserve global forests by 2030. So there's a very clear link there. And the program is open to scholars from the United States and nations that border the Amazon River. Next slide, please. Amazonia builds on a rich history of successful cohort-based models within the Fulbright Scholar Program. So on this slide, you can see the evolution of things. Back in the 2000s, we launched the New Century Scholar Program. That was our first scholarly collaborative research program. It was more theoretical in nature. Then we moved up to Fulbright Nexus. That was a WHA exclusive scholarly collaboration model, run for a few years with 3 cohorts, 60 participants. This is the first collaborative research program where we introduced climate-focused research. And then finally, we moved on to Fulbright Arctic, which takes the Nexus model applied to the Arctic communities. All this to say that over the past 25 years, we have been piloting and perfecting these cohort-based models. Next slide, please. very quickly, themes and structure. So over a year and a half, scholars participate in 3-person seminars, and they work in interdisciplinary and multinational research teams. They conduct exchange visits to the United States or to Latin America to further their projects. And they continue this collaboration virtually via regularly scheduled online meetings through the entire 18 months. At the very end, in the final meeting, they actually present their policy recommendations and share their work in public fora at the final meeting in Washington, D.C. Scholars, I said earlier, work in thematic areas. And so you can see on the slide the 3 intertwined thematic areas for Amazonia. And they are all addressing social, economic, and environmental issues facing the Amazon ecosystem. Next slide, please. So this is just to give you a visual of the timeline. And you'll see there that it does cover 18 months plus. But my point here is just to emphasize that we really started working and developing this program right after the pandemic in 2021. So it takes a while for us to develop and to be able to launch such an effort, with a multitude of partners. Next slide, please. So what is the impact of this program? Well, I can think of many, and I'm sure you can too. But just to summarize, Fulbright Amazonia builds bridges and expands networks all the way from the individual to the institutional and to the national and regional levels. It leverages collaboration across boundaries to deliver practical solutions and policy-informed research to respond to shared challenges, generally intractable challenges, complex challenges. It convenes collaborators from the public sector, the private sector, NGOs, and academic sectors to develop a joint actionable research agenda. In this particular case, this is a Panamazonian research agenda. It strengthens bilateral relations with partner governments. In the case of Fulbright Amazonia, we are co-funding this initiative with the Brazilian Commission. But not only does it deepen our relation with Brazil, it does so with all the other participating countries as well. It also deepens our collaboration internally with Fulbright stakeholders, because it does take a village to develop and launch a program like this. So it's really a bonding exercise for all of us. And finally, because the program emphasizes community involvement and grassroots solutions to protect biodiversity and bolster conservation practices, it integrates traditional knowledge systems with modern science and emerging technologies. Next slide, please. In terms of institutional impact, this slide alone shows you the range of projects that we're having on cohort 1 of scholars doing all sorts of interesting and exciting work around the Amazon basin. And institutionally, we have 18 institutions collaborating in a myriad of ways just on cohort 1, which is really astounding. And of course, at the personal level, which is what Fulbright is all about, we develop enduring friendships and collaborations, and that's the heart of what we do in Fulbright. Next slide, please. And finally, I would like to leave you with a very brief video that captures highlights of our Amazonia's initial meeting in Belém last June, a few months ago. So I hope you enjoy it, and I'll be happy to answer questions at the end. Thank you.
Of scholarly collaboration to deliver practical solutions with public policy impact to directly improve the lives of communities across the Amazon basin.
Não adianta só manter a floresta em pé, a gente precisa ter esse olhar muito grande para os povos da floresta, para esses grandes defensores.
It's the home of many cultures, of great biodiversity, obviously. It's being threatened by a whole host of reasons, and grateful to be able to work here.
So with Fulbright Amazonia, we wanted to bring everyone together to begin to work together to understand how we may want the same thing, but use different words and concepts, and to realize the value of thinking about the Amazon across the boundaries.
Oh, this is quite interesting, the work that you're going to do in the next several years. We will certainly support understanding how to overcome these big challenges.
Thank you very much, Jenny. I'm sure that people can navigate to that video and get a better experience on their home computers. But those are the exciting elements of a live broadcast. Let's turn to some questions now. I'm going to take the moderator's privilege to ask the first question, which is somewhat of a self-serving one. But again, thank you for sharing your experience and knowledge. And I think you've demonstrated the breadth of the issues that can be addressed through cultural diplomacy, as well as the creativity that you all bring to your work. And I really appreciate your presentations. The first question I'd like to ask is, what impact or what has been your experience of getting the Lois Roth Award for Excellence in Cultural Diplomacy? Let's reverse order. We'll start with Jenny.
Well, you know, for me personally, it was very touching, you know, to, well, learn that I had been recognized, that my work had been recognized in this way. It was unexpected, and it was very touching. And obviously, it's something that motivates you when you receive this type of feedback. So thank you.
That's really one of our goals, is to motivate people to keep up the good work and to know that your work is recognized and appreciated. Sammy, are you there? Let's see. Let's go to Larry while we wait for Sammy, hopefully, to come back.
Thanks, Anne. I share Jenny's gratitude and surprise, honestly, as well, with the recognition. But I also think that it's a testament to the continuity of public diplomacy work. I mean, the work that Lois Roth did in the 1970s and 1980s continues to my work today. And the tools that we have, tools that she and I both shared in common, like the International Visitor Leadership Program or the Fulbright program that Jenny just spoke about, I mean, are things that we continue to use, because the impact, as you mentioned, is not something that I can measure in an annual evaluation, perhaps. But it's something that when we have a member of parliament who's gone on a Fulbright, or we have a business leader who participated in a Humphrey Fellowship, that investment, maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years, maybe even longer before their appointment to a position or their election to a role, is a real testament to the work that Foreign Service officers, our locally engaged staff, and our colleagues in Washington do.
And that came in is for Larry during his presentation. The question is, could you say a little bit more about the educational opportunities the U.S. provides to 100,000 students in Somalia?
Yeah, sure thing. The program's called Bar Amabaro. It means teach or learn in Somali, and it comes from like a much loved nationwide civic literacy program in the 1970s. So they took the name. It's a USAID program that works in partnership with the Ministry of Education in Somalia to take youth ages about 8 to 15 years old who were denied an education. They were denied an education because 2 decades of violence nearly destroyed Somalia's educational system. I mean, an educational system that was marked by poor quality, insufficient training for teachers, inadequate resources, and it seeks to increase their access for these students in South and Central Somalia to an education. So tens of thousands of students have participated in this USAID program over 5 years. They've trained hundreds of teachers. They've rehabilitated classrooms that at times have been destroyed by Al-Shabaab, other violent groups. So it's a real testament to our development colleagues. But where that intersection with cultural diplomacy comes in is because of those relationships formed with the educational professionals in the Ministry of Education with our USAID colleagues. We were able to organize an international visitor leadership program for about 24 educators at the state and federal level so that they could participate in an exchange to focus on curriculum development for Somalia. So again, taking that development part of diplomacy and then working with cultural diplomacy, we look forward to the seeds and how they'll grow from that exchange just late last year.
Thank you. Let me go back to Sammy to ask him the question about what receiving the Lois Roth Foundation. And Sammy got a special award, a special category award that we have for locally employed staff, which is named for Jill Jacot-Guillermod, who was a locally employed staff member in South Africa during the apartheid times. And Lois considered her the most amazing locally engaged staff member she ever met. And we have been able to develop an award in her honor, especially for locally engaged staff members. And Sammy received that award. Could you tell us what that meant for you?
Yeah, on the personal level, it meant really so much for me because it gave me a meaning to what I have been doing and what I will continue to do until my retirement. And for my colleagues, they look at this as a motivating factor. They say, okay, you are a role model, and we would like to have a career like yourself, and we want to achieve what you have achieved. And I've been talking to many colleagues who come to me and say, what's the secret? And I always tell them, love your job, love the others. That's all. What is it about? It's about, how to make other lives change, how you can improve other lives, how you can bring happiness to others. So these are simple words, but very meaningful to me. And I'm glad that I can be an inspiration to my colleagues.
Thank you, Sammy. Back to the questions from the audience. We have a question from a graduate student at George Washington University studying global communications who wants to know from Larry, when you're holding cultural diplomacy activities, did the team encounter any difficulties in identifying the target audience? And how did the team activities and attract the local audience to come to the programs?
That's a great question, and it's definitely a challenge that we faced, not least of which because of the physical challenges of operating in the security environment like Mogadishu. As I mentioned, we're largely confined to the airport compound, so we were always bringing people to us. And a large part of my team's responsibility was simply the logistics of how we were going to get people to embassy events beyond all the, through all the different checkpoints and name checks and those kinds of things. So the physical challenge was definitely a part of our calculation in events. The other thing was in identifying audiences, it was important to us to keep expanding the circle of contacts. It can become a bit of an echo chamber if you're just talking to the same people all the time, and especially if they know what you want to hear. We felt in our public diplomacy events, it was really an opportunity to go beyond individuals already in our contact list, but to ask others to bring a friend, to issue invitations for virtual programs, despite the limited internet penetration in urban areas. Among a certain socioeconomic level, there was the internet penetration, especially participation on mobile phones. So there was a way to reach new audiences, and slowly but surely, hopefully in the 4 years that our embassy has been on the ground, we can continue to expand that circle so that the reach of the United States can engage a larger portion of the population of an incredible country that really has an energy and a cultural richness unparalleled on the continent.
Thanks, Larry. We have a question for Jenny. Could you say a bit more about specific ways in which Indigenous populations and traditional knowledges are being explored and or activated by Fulbright Amazonia?
Sure. If you go back to, one of my slides, I think it was the second slide or something like that, where I talk about, what's the goal, the objective of this program is basically to come up, with research findings that do not stay on a shelf, but there are actionable policies that will directly improve the lives of local communities where we're doing the research. So, that naturally lends itself to participatory types of methodologies in research. And we have in this cohort, launching cohort, we have an anthropologist, Dr. Jeff Hawley, and then we have a geographer, Dr. Valerio Gomez. And so they have also activated networks of researchers in the social sciences, although we do have some folks in chemical engineer, public health, and others. But my point is that part of the research, I would say all the scholars produced individual projects and applied to the program with individual projects where they would be informing their research through the perspectives of local communities, whether there was indigenous, whether they were rural, marginalized communities, Afro-descendants. So it is really integrated into the research that is being done. And that's how really this model takes into account their perspectives to come up with a more integrated knowledge system.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. Question for Sammy. How do locally engaged staff, how do they participate in strategic planning for programs and activities at the post? And do you get training for that?
Yes, definitely. We get training for this at FSI. So most recently,
the Foreign Service Institute in Washington, you get to come to Washington.
Exactly. Most recently, there was a public diplomacy masterclass, and about 62 people participated. But also regarding developing a strategic vision, that's basically done in consultations with a lot of the other local staff according to areas of expertise, and generally from our positions as strategic public engagement specialists, we try to work in concert with the different sections, the econ section, the political section, depending on the complexity of the project. But we need to have the good knowledge of the environment, whether it's economic environment, social environment, and also understanding what are the impacts of that project and whether they do square with our mission strategic goals. For example, if we are focusing on as a priority on the climate change, then we have to really have good connections with the experts in the field, do a lot of research in the field, and then come up with a viable project that can bring about a good change, and also ensure that the project is sustainable and successful, just like the project I referred to earlier, which is the cybersecurity project. There was a vision behind it, We worked in collaboration with the assistance unit, with the USAID, with other colleagues who understand that, you know, the only way to bring about and support the economic development of Tunisia is by, and Tunisia's transition to a digital economy is by, you know, supporting this area in particular, which is helping with making Tunisia's networks more secure and more safe. So there was a whole strategy behind that, and we continue to work on this strategically by brainstorming together with, for example, now with the assistance unit, we have this idea of creating hybrid centers of excellence in the center of Tunis and in the south of Tunisia, where we can have the different implementers like Cisco, Palo Alto, Fortinet, which are leaders in the field, to offer open courses to students, and we will have physical spaces as well. So students from all across the country can benefit from virtual trainings, but also you know, in-person trainings in this center. So there is a, when we brainstorm and when we come together, we try to see the full and big picture of the project.
Excellent. You know, I think one of the things that's striking about all of the presentations we've had today is, well, as I said at the beginning, when you think of cultural diplomacy, you often think of arts programs or things like that. And what we're seeing is that the fundamental thing about, pardon me, cultural diplomacy is the building of these long-term relationships. And oftentimes that's more often through education and exchange programs that that these long-term relationships develop. And that you can use those types of programs to address these really important, strategic, difficult programs and policies that need to be addressed and that make all of everyone's efforts valuable to U.S. national security. So we're coming to the end of our time, but I see that we have a question from a colleague of mine in the Lois Roth Endowment, Celeste Land, and she brings up the question, we are in an election year. How does uncertainty about elections outcome impact academic exchanges and other programming? Does anybody want to take a crack at that?
I'll say one word, or a couple words. I mean, elections have consequences, right? But I think any public diplomacy practitioner is well practiced in flexibility. In Mogadishu, I had more than one program interrupted by indirect fire mortars from outside the airport compound. There's always plan A, plan B, plan C, and maybe more. There's also, of course, a certain fluidity in grant funding. You know, we have planned exchanges already for 2025, and flagship programs like the Young African Leaders Initiative, the Mandela Washington Fellowship, organized in 2014 during the Obama administration, continued through the Trump administration, and now into the Biden administration. So there's a certain level of continuity with great programs like that 6-week exchange.
Yeah, I will just add one point, which is in case of Fulbright, you know, Fulbright has tremendous support. Is bipartisan support from Congress. So I don't, you know, I think I guess the question perhaps has more to do about with the themes of the exchanges that we're running. And we are very flexible. You know, just echoing what Larry just said, you know, in Fulbright, we plan and develop years in advance. So we have programs that we're developing and launching now for 2 years down the road. And you know, until now, we haven't had, you know, any issues with that, at least not with Nexus or with Amazonia thus far. And we certainly hope that we won't have problems with this thematic.
Okay. Thank you. We're right up at the top of the hour, and I just want to thank the participants and everyone for their thoughtful questions and comments. And at this point, it's time for me to turn over the program to Professor Nicholas Cull, who is a fellow PDCA board member and he's going to preview our next First Monday Forum program. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you very much, Anne, and thanks for a wonderful session. So our next speaker for First Monday in March is going to be Fallon Osorio, who's coordinator of the Interdepartmental Working Group on Sport Diplomacy for the Government of Colombia. And she's been involved in a really exciting set of sporting initiatives that are seeking to build relationships for Colombia. And I think it's great that we'll be hearing from a non-American or non-United States example around the same field of cultural diplomacy.
Wonderful.
And you've muted.
Thank you. I think that concludes our program today. Thanks to everybody for joining us.